I'm very excited to welcome my dear friend Rachel Lee Nabors. Rachel Lee and I met at a CascadiaJS meetup a few years ago, and since then, Rachel Lee has come to one of my D&D improv shows, has actually introduced me as a speaker during last year's CascadiaJS. So it was kind of like this, but we swapped spots. And also, one of my favorite memories was when Rachel Lee and we did a karaoke at the after party last year, where we did an iconic rendition of Telephone, where I was the Lady Gaga, or actually, you were the Lady Gaga to my Beyonce, right, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
And ever since then, I have been searching for my Beyonce in karaoke bars around the world.
You have found your Beyonce. I've been here the whole time.
I have found you again, my lady.
Yeah, I swear we come to the conference every year just so that we can do that whole thing again, right?
Is it not up?
Yeah.
What's up with that? I see
Okay,
it
but
down
there's
here.
a side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh yeah. Yeah,
Oh my
there's
gosh.
the video, that's us. So,
My lady.
thank you. Yeah, so Rachel Lee is an example of the long-term friends you can make at CascadiaJS, and I'm very excited for you to hear their presentation.
Thank you for introducing me. It's really great to be back here, Daphne.
Thank you.
You all ready? Have you had your coffee? You've had your coffee, you've had your tea, but you're still waking up. That's okay. I'm here to make sure you do wake up. We're going to start with a little cardio in the morning. We're going to do some exercises, lifting up our hands. I already got our first technical difficulty out of the way. Okay, now, hands down. Hands up if you use web animations at work. Okay, all right. Now, hands down again. Hands up if you're afraid to use web animation. Okay, we're going to help with that. We're definitely going to help with that today. And okay, more. How many of you know what the Web Animations API is? Raise your little hands. How many of you know what CSS animations are? Raise your little hands. Okay, great. You all are going to learn so much today. So much. I'm so happy. Thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Lee Nabors. You might remember me from such projects as my pandemic pet here, the React.dev website, which I worked on with the React core team in London, which I now reside in. I used to live in Seattle, but Seattle and I are like one of those relationships that just keeps being on and off. It's like on paper you think it's going to work out, but then we get to the altar and one of us is like, no, I can't do it. Anyway, so to London I've gone. But before I worked on the React core team, etc., I used to be an award-winning cartoonist for teenagers. I had 400,000 teenage girls reading my webcomic every week. But that was like back in the 2000s, right? So I was an artiste. But I needed to make money, and I could build websites. So I went on and I did that. Unfortunately, Flash had died, and even though I loved making cool, creative things and wanted to be a video game developer when I was a kiddo, well, Flash was dead. So I got into web standards instead. Instead of learning ActionScript, I learned JavaScript. And instead of learning tweens, I learned the Web Animation API. And this is how I was able to use my comics skills to create stories, interactive stories that still worked on the web using HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and I teamed up with Adobe's Inspire team to create Alice in Videoland, which was a, hey, designers, did you know that you can make cool stuff using web technologies, even though, Flash is probably dead now? And this introduced a lot of designers to browser-based animations. I really got into it. I was super extra. I made character sheets. You can still see them in the original talk. The link is up there. The talk was also made in HTML and CSS and JavaScript because it was popular back then. Now I just use Keynote because I'm lazy. And 4 years after that, I got to collaborate with MDN and the W3C on the Web Animations API, and I brought Alice back to create this growing and shrinking game, when she falls into the tunnel and she's got to eat and drink things to get smaller and bigger. So it's been a while. It's been a while since I made the original Alice in Wonderland demo. And the good news is that it still works. In fact, the CSS animations, because they weren't well supported, I had fallbacks so that if the animations wouldn't run, you could still enjoy the story. In fact, if you hit print on it, I was using image replacement so that if you can actually see all the text of the rewritten Alice story that I created. And if you turn a screen reader on, it will read you the story out loud while you're scrolling through it, because, you know, everything must be accessible. So I gave you 2 different experiences. Oh man, if you're clapping now, your hands are going to be tired. You might want to like hang on to them because you've got a lot of great people coming. And we're not done yet. So here's how I built it. This is the stuff that I used 10 years ago. None of it is being maintained anymore. Let's see, we got Modernizer for feature detection and dependency loading. That would basically be like, oh, there's no CSS animations here. Put a class on it. JQuery for DOM manipulation and plugins. I actually wanted to use vanilla JavaScript for this, but everything else I wanted to do had a jQuery plugin, like Hammer.js, because iOS didn't support touch gestures on Safari. Like, can you believe that? It was 10 years ago. jQuery visible, detecting when elements are going to be on screen or not on screen. Waypoints, which would execute functions when that element had been scrolled into. And a scroller, which was great for triggering events on scroll. I had a lot of stuff around scrolling and recalculating the size of the viewport. And debounced resize, once again, like I said, recalculating all these measurements that things would fire perfectly when the browser had been resized. Basically doing a lot of stuff you can do with media queries today. All right. And of course, there were lots of CSS animations and transitions, including Compass and Sass. Has anyone here used Sass? Yay! Okay, how many of you used Compass? Okay, you people, I love you. I use Compass. It's a thing that you strap onto Sass, and it did a bunch of stuff like adding vendor prefixes to your animations and generating sprites. I used it a lot for sprite generation. So when I got in there, I was like, you know what? When I install these same gems, etc., even though it's not being maintained, it still compiles. We're just going to keep using SCSS. But I'll show you the CSS it makes. So it's been 10 years. And last year, I went to CSS Day in Amsterdam, and I realized the Web Animation API has released some really cool features recently, like many years after the original API came out, that would now allow me to completely redo all of that example sans jQuery libraries. All of these cool examples are being supported right in the browser. And I wanted to recreate her with modern standards. Also, she looks pretty cool. I spent like 80 hours building this thing and hand drawing all of the little assets. So I was like, let's bring her back out. She's so cool. She's my hello world. And there are finally enough animation features that I could get rid of all of these bulky JavaScript bits and replace them with a couple of nice things, including accessibility with prefers reduced motion, intersection observer, handling all the things coming in and out of the viewport, CSS5 animations, handling all those scrolling. I use the Web Animations API as well for those. You don't have to use CSS. We'll get into that. And scroll and view timelines, my besties. I love them. And lastly, view transitions, which we're going to add a little bit of a spin on this to connect the first Alice with the second Alice. So let's take a look at the new stack. Let's dive in. If we're going to start with accessibility, which prefers reduced motion, there are people out there who don't want to see all your bouncing springs and stuff. Maybe it makes them sick. Maybe they've got to save battery. Maybe they just like to experience their life in a series of slow fades to black. But they will turn that section on, and you want to make sure that you can still have a good experience. So the lovely thing about all of the animations I made was that the story still has styles and settings that make a lot of sense if you are viewing it without animations on. Easy. So now I just use prefers reduced motion in the JavaScript. Using this little helper function I built, is reduced. That'll check to see if the media query is set to reduced or not. Nice. You can also use this in the CSS as well to kind of nest things. In this case, if prefers reduced motion is there's no preference, it will actually make the rabbit that jumps down the hole visible. Otherwise, it's just not visible by default. Little things like that, predetermined. Intersection observer is what I'm using to see if something is in the browser's viewport at any given time. Now, remember, intersection observer was not originally designed for interactive people, developers, etc. It was really created to reduce the payload of ads. It was a spec introduced to make ads lighter. So it's not an altruistic spec, but it can be co-opted for good. So this is the HTML. This is the DOM. You notice it's a bunch of divs with classes. Great thing about divs is you can load them up with classes, like you might use a state management solution. I'm just like pumping classes into my DOM here. So what do we got up here? This is what it looks like. We've got scenes. Scenes contain pages. And the great thing is that scenes can be queued. When a scene is visible or I want to make it visible, I slap a queue on it, queue that scene, bam. And then suddenly that scene and all of the pages it contains become visible. And the pages, when they're in view, will get a class of InViewed. When they're not in view, or they've been viewed previously, they get a class of viewed. So pages are the only things that are actively being shown as being in or out. And this way, I'm able to trigger things, scenes, being revealed, fading into them, and triggering animations only when they're in view on a page. Fun with classes, fun with tying animations to classes. But here's how this works with intersection observers. I learned from working with intersection observers that intersection observers suck. The whole way this is written, it's like, wait. I have to loop over it again. I live streamed this, and somebody from Vercel was chilling in Poland and like, oh yeah, I've done this before. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Who wrote this? Not me, it was an ad team. So if scene is intersecting and scene is visible, that is, its opacity is set to 1, it will go ahead and add the class of Q. And then it will also remove the scene observer. Because remember, scenes only have to be queued once. We're only going to trigger it once, unobserve them, free up that memory. And this is how we pass every scene this intersection observer inside the book. Ignore the let. I'm not getting involved in that in this talk. But anyway, you go in, you take the array of all these scenes, and you slap the scene observer handler on each of them. Intersection observer for pages is much the same way, only there's a little bit of an if-else going on in there. It's missing a curly brace. I cannot unsee it now. No, wait, that works. It works. It's just the indentation's getting me. All right, whatever. But you can see how it does a little do-si-do. The threshold is a little bit more finicky on this one because I just had to tweak it to get it just right. Threshold lets you know how far in or out of the viewport it's allowed to be before you kick it off. Okay, that one's good. Just go read the spec if you gotta use it. I just wanted to show you it could be done. We're not gonna spin out on how it is done because there's cooler stuff to look at, like spring easings. Spring easings, oh my God, where have these been for 10 years? Like, this is the thing that we did with Flash, is we like, this is what it looks like. This is what a spring easing looks like. A little kind of a bounce, a double bounce. You use cubic Beziers, you only get one bounce. You don't get multiple bounces. You don't get 3 bounces, you get 1 bounce. And so to recreate this, we'd end up chaining a bunch of animations together with delays and blah, blah, blah. So somebody thought it would be a great idea to co-op the linear timing function and turn it into a little linear easing function, make it so that you could give it an argument of comma-separated linear stops containing up to 2 additional stop lengths, blah, blah, blah. Let me just show it. This is what it looks like. So, well, it describes a sort of a very chunky, polygonal little bounce graph, right? It's very chunky. And this is what that looks like in CSS, by the way. I passed it with JavaScript back there. Here's how it is in CSS. Hey, you can hand author it. No one will hand author it. No one will hand author this. But it allowed me to do this. I'll show you a tool for hand authoring. Now, when she lands, there's a little bounce, because it definitely feels like she's going into the bottom. I love it. Thank you for letting me do this. People used to have to use a tweening library like GreenSock to get this effect. No mas. Now you just use a lot of stops in your CSS. Here's one of those tools I told you about, linear easing generator.netlify.app. I think one of the people who worked on the specs created this. You can pass it like a SVG curve or anything you want. It'll convert it to this little string that you need. So, huzzah. Happy hunting. Web animations. This is my gold stuff. I love web animations because I worked on the documentation and the spec for a little bit. Web animations rock for interactions. Like, animations with CSS, they're cool if you're just kind of like animating something on the scene or on a hover. But if you're actually trying to be like, this animation runs, triggers that thing happening over there, this input's going to trigger this animation happening, you're in the JavaScript. That is behavior. That's not presentation. That's behavior. And that is when we bring out the Web Animations API, which, by the way, did I mention, completely underlies all of your CSS animations. You can recreate any CSS animation with the Web Animation API because it's all Web Animations API under the hood. So here's how we think about it. A refresher for all of you who are not yet using the Web Animations API is you can think of it as a DVD player. You get a lovely animation object, and it takes a keyframe effect, which is kind of like a DVD, which contains all of the images of your animation. And yet you stick it in there, and this is what it looks like. You know, here we've got an Alice frightened keyframes, a new keyframe effect object. That's like the DVD. We get a Alice off of the document. That's a document element get ID. And then we got this little array of CSS properties in a before state and an after state. We could put a bunch of other states in there, but we're not going to do that for this talk. And then the second object we pass is a timing object. You know, we've got iterations. It's going to run twice. Each of those iterations is going to last for a second and a half. Those are milliseconds. And we're going to use that steps timing function, which I'm not getting into here, but it's really cool. It allows you to do some really nice sprite animations. And it's going to jump between two parts of the sprite sheet, swapping out one background position for the other one. It's going to give us a really cool animated effect. And here's how we animate that. We make a new animation object, we pass that keyframes object, and we pass it a very special thing, a timeline. The document's timeline, which for the past 6 years has been the only timeline available to us. The document timeline starts immediately whenever you open a new tab. Each tab on your computer has one timeline for its document running forever into the future until you close it. If you think about it too long, it will cause existential angst. And then, of course, you just call its play method, because every animation object has a play method. Just like your DVD player, you go boop. You can also hit pause. You can also get current time, a bunch of other stuff. But all you really need to know is boop, play. All right, scroll-driven animations. That was a general animation. I'm going to show you a new kind of timeline, not the documents timeline. We're going to talk about a timeline that's very special. So the animation API is made up of two things. I like to think of them as the when, that's your time, your document timeline, your scroll timeline, et cetera, and the what, those are your keyframes. You just met our keyframes. Let's take a closer look at the when. Yeah, timelines and keyframe objects. I was unfortunately disappointed in the documentation, which said basically foo is foo when it came to scroll timeline. So let me dive a little deeper into this. I didn't write these docs. These are not mine. I don't know whose they are, but they're not mine. All right. So when we're scrolling, you can see that Alice's body is moving from the top of the page. I'm using, by the way, position sticky. I love you, sticky. That's another thing, but we're not getting into it. But it basically means it's sort of like fixed, but it stops when you get past the containing element. Love it. So as we're scrolling to the top, she's going from that position A, being at the top, and she's being translated down the DOM element to position B, which features her at the bottom. The timeline for that is directly proportional to your scroll location on the page. So she is being tweened down the page in correspondence to where you are on it. This is what this looks like in the DOM tunnel. This is the nearest scrolling element that contains our little scrollable element here, Alice, and falling. And this is what the keyframe effect looks like. Like I said, two transforms, beginning to middle. We got easing linear on there, constant rate of change. All right, how do we do the magic? How do we swap out the document timeline for a scroll timeline? It's as easy as making a new scroll timeline. Literally, that's what you do. And then when you make your animation, you give it the keyframes, and you give it that new scroll timeline. And then you hit play, and it works. So in your CSS, you can do it. You can add a little supports call here to make sure, like, oh, if you support scroll timeline, I'm going to make you do this. And the magic is, here's your animation, fall, linear, both. You got some keyframes off screen somewhere. But check it out. New property, animation timeline, and you pass it scroll. There are a couple of arguments. Go read MDN docs about them. But this is it. This is how you do that with CSS. You don't need GreenSock. You don't need any tweening libraries. You don't need Framer Motion. You don't need nothing. You just need CSS or the Web Animations API. Take your pick. Now, scroll timeline has a son named view timeline. And this is the fun part. So here's an example. Let's take a look at what we got here. So you notice how, as you're scrolling down, her attitude is changing. It kind of looks like a scroll animation, but it's not. In this case, her background is jumping down one of those steps animations according to how in view, where she is in relation to being in view or off view. I'll dive into that. This is what it looks like. You can see the background position change and the steps and the fill. That's the keyframe object, but we don't care about the keyframe. We're looking at the view timeline. To make a new view timeline, what you have to do is you have to pass it a subject. This is the element that you're watching to see how visible it is in the viewport. You're going to interpolate the animation according to how far along their trajectory in the viewport they are. And you can pass it a couple of things here. I'm using inset. This is like an offset for how much you should delay that animation according to its location. I tweaked with it a bit, won't go into it. And once again, here's how you make it. New animation object, you pass it the keyframes, you pass it a view timeline, and what do? Come on, you've had your coffee. Yeah, just hit play. There you go. Yeah, you got it. You know how to make animations work with JavaScript. You can do this. Okay, what's that look like in CSS? Well, notice here I'm wrapping it in prefers reduced motion. Actually, I think I meant to do that on the scroll one, but this is what you do if you want to not play this if people want reduced motion. And you're using supports. And there's the animation. And once again, with the animation timeline property, this time instead of scroll, you pass it view, and you pass it those arguments for that inset. Very nice. How do you keep these straight? Well, scroll timeline is based on the scroll length of the element's nearest scrollable parent. I really had trouble troubleshooting this because I use a lot of overflow hidden and a lot of scroll no-no in my CSS. So I was very there was a good 2 hours on Twitch where I was just poking it with a screwdriver and being like, why don't you work? Debugging animations still has some way to come. But if you have time and you like pain, it's a great way to spend an afternoon. And view timeline is based on the visibility of the subject on the screen. It's oriented towards the element that is being animated, not the position of the scroll. The playhead, or the current time of each animation, is determined slightly differently too. For the scroll timeline, the playhead is where your bar is in that scrolling area. You can literally think of it as scrubbing up and down a track. Whereas with view timeline, the playhead's current time is related directly to where the element is in the viewport. That's your playhead. And the duration, once again, for scroll timeline, it's directly related, directly proportional to the scrollable parent's dimensions. In fact, the polyfill basically calculates how long the scrollable parent element is and just updates the current time with a little math to proportional to where the item is located on that, or where your scroll bar is located. I won't get into it. Just use the polyfill. And the duration for view timeline is, of course, correlated to the subject's total trajectory across the viewport. Its visibility, as it were. So why would you need to know all of that? Because what if you want to chain them? Let me explain what this is doing here, because it's very special. In the original, you noticed how she's freaking out. And then, as you scroll down, she starts chilling out, and she's looking around, and her emotions are changing. And then when you get to the bottom, there's a segue to another scene. Those are 3 separate animations. Previously, to do these with CSS, I couldn't. I would have to do a bunch of delays and hope that, the thing was visible before one of the delays ran out. It was not easy to orchestrate these, to compose them. But this right here is a composition of animation. What I'm doing is I'm using this lovely on-finish property of the animations here and passing it another animation to play when it's finished. When Alice is finished, freaking out, that's run twice, Alice emotions, which is tied to the view timeline, kicks in. Alice's emotions, when it finishes, will trigger this handy cut function that I made, which literally jumps to the next scene, plays a fade out, fade in animation, and adds a cue onto the whole scene. And also, there's a callback. We won't get into that. And then at the very end, I'm going to hit play on the fall animation and play on the frightened animation. Remember, the fall is the one that lets her scroll down, and the frightened one is the one with her freaking out. Frightened, when it's done, will trigger emotions. When it's done, that is to say, when she scrolled off this end of the page, that's going to trigger the cut. Yeah, this is what that looks like. Come on. Here we go. We're going to follow the little bun, and she's frightened, she's freaking out. Frightened finishes, we cut directly to her emotions. Start scrolling. As we scroll, her emotions change. She's getting closer to the bottom. Emotions ends at the bottom, triggers scene cut, and there we go, we're at the bottom. Whew. A dream 10 years in the making. I've always wanted to do that. All right, it does only work in Chromium right now. So Safari and Firefox folks, use the polyfill. I basically made this polyfill. You don't want to make the polyfill. It's a good polyfill. Just use it. It's great. You'll love it. Mwah, it's wonderful. I recommend it for prime time. That's all you need to know. And you know what? There's this lovely debugger which you can find. Sometimes it didn't work for me. I'm not sure why, but still, it's really handy because this feature does not exist in Chrome's DevTools, but this was created by one of their developer advocates. So give it a try if you are, enjoying a painful afternoon on Twitch debugging animation. Whew. Next up, CSS 5. Multi-page view transitions. I was just at CSS Day in the Netherlands, and there was a big conversation about, should these be CSS 5 features? And I can assure you, all the CSS I have shown you with the animations, those are CSS 5 animations. Buzzword. All right. So multi-page app view transitions. I'd love to tell you all the cool ways that you can use these with single-page app transitions, etc. But what you need to know is, this is the cool stuff, this is bleeding edge, is that now you can transition from one page on just a regular flat file site to another page with animations. That is possible on Chrome 1.2.6 and above. That's the gotcha here. I also beat my head against a wall for quite some time before it was like, oh, I need to update Chrome. So keep that in mind. There's no polyfill for this. This is just for 1.2.6+. The single-page application view transitions, they're available right now. Go use them. But for multi-page, this is the new shiny. So remember the original Alice in Wonderland Web Animations API demo I showed you? Or kind of like your comeback. This has all been done. This is showing what you can do with the Web Animations API, whereas the original was really like, here's what you could do with JavaScript and CSS. So this is kind of ho-hum. I'm not going to refactor this because it's still golden, but I want to marry it to the original demo. So I sketched it out, and basically I've got a bunch of tiny micro demos. I got the long scrolling demo that I just showed you, and then I got like a loading page that I made, and this is the drinking game, and I was like, I got an idea. We're going to put the scrolling page on, the scrolling demo is going to be on one page. When we get to the bottom, we're going to use a multi-page app view transition to pop over here. There's going to be a little loader, because I love loaders. And then we're going to have her land in the tunnel, and then we're going to do the game, because that's a much better segue of topics. All right. How do we do that? It's really easy. You just add this sucker to your CSS. App view transition, navigation auto. It will automatically make it so that any page you navigate to on your site is going to get a little fade out. It's just going to fade. It's just going to fade between them. It's really boring. That's your default animation between these. I'm going to dress it up a little bit and show you how you can use CSS to make it a little cooler. This is what that looks like. Just fade to that second page. Nice. Okay. Nothing to write home about. And then we got this. There's like boop. And yeah, you can you see what's on the next page. The fallback, the great thing about this is that the fallback for browsers that don't support view transitions is just a jump cut. It's still navigable. It's just like using any other page. So it's a nice little plus that you can give people. So let's dress it up a bit. We're keeping the fade. We're still going to fade between the two pages. But we're going to add a little shebang here. We're going to make it so that it looks like she's kind of sliding. We're going to make the fall look a little bit more, like she is sliding down into the next page using these keyframes. And, here we go. You get this lovely new pseudo element. There are a lot of pseudo elements. If you start really getting into view transitions, you can put these pseudo elements anywhere you want. View transition old. In this case, it's basically saying anytime the HTML is transitioning, use these animations. You can remember view transition old is the thing you're transitioning from. That would be the current page. And the view transition new is the thing you're transitioning into. And these are the animations you'll run. The browser makes a little snapshot of the two of them and runs these animations on them to interpolate between them. Here's how that little setup looks. I'm still perfecting this, but you can see there's a little slide up and in now. I think there's a lot of room to finesse this, and yes, it's a little bit more than a fade. There's a little drag in, drag out. But you can see how much more fun it could be. You can even run view transitions on individual elements to make them super complex. There are so many great examples of how to do this more complex in a single page app or with multiple elements, and that's super cool. I don't know why it went blank. I'm just going to consider it. There is an actual slide now. Let's see if that's going to come up. I'm not sure why we're having a technical difficulty. I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in again. That usually works for me. It's like, have you tried turning off overflow on all the things? Let's just try plugging it back in again. Come on. Bestie, I love you. Are you there? Well, I guess I could keep talking. Well, I will. We'll see. I'll just keep monologuing. So the great thing about view transitions, you can use them with single-page apps or multi-page apps. You can use them with CSS or JavaScript. You just saw me declare them with CSS. Guess what? You can declare that with JavaScript using the Web Animation API. There are so many great demos of how crazy you can get with this stuff. I'm showing you the base case because that was the one demo I could not find. And I wanted to get you to at least make something fade in and fade out when you go home today. That's there you start. That's like your intro. And the best part, you can animate the whole dang page, or you can animate individual components. You get really cool with it. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that the MDN documentation around this feature, it still sometimes conflicts with what I read in the articles that the great Chrome dev team has put out. So I would refer to the Chrome blog as a source of truth until the MDN documentation catches up. Yeah, and there's a great URL, which I'd be showing you here, but it's just not showing. So why use these things? It's easy to respect users' preferences when you're using CSS and JavaScript and reduce motion preferences. It's easy. As you saw, a few helper functions, and you're off to the races. Graceful degradation and polyfills. Because it's there in the browser, if it doesn't work, the browser still just works. You can have those page animations or not. And of course, better performance. Because you're using CSS and JavaScript, they have direct access to the rendering engine for the browser. They're not using request animation frame to fire calculations on every repaint on the screen. They're genuinely just checking out what's available down there. Oh, hi, friend. And lighter code, because you're not loading up a whole animation library full of a bunch of features nobody asked for. You're using what's right there in the browser. It came locally. It's awesome. I'm pretty sure I have one more thing. Oh, yeah. And, like CSS animations and the Web Animations API, scroll and view timelines, they're green. They're ready to go. You can use them right now. Use a polyfill. It's great. There's no reason not to. I still love to code. To this day, I've spent 8 years in big tech doing program and product management. Well, that's cool. That's not my slide, though. But I've worked at Microsoft, and I've worked at Amazon, and it's all been great. But at the end of the day, I still just get jazzed by telling a story with words and pictures. It's so alive making. And I do have a slide that links to all the resources, so I'm going to wait just 1 minute, because I bet some of you out there are like, I want those resources. Where am I going to find this information? So I'll just continue to monologue for a few minutes. But when I first created Alice, I was sad that I'd given up my career in comics and gotten into web development. And for me, this was like a light at the end of the tunnel that I could still be a creative person and code. And I feel like now, in the past 10 years, websites have come to look more and more the same. And when people are teaching each other to code, it's usually like a to-do list app or some other hello world. And I was realizing as I traversed these different companies and talked with different developer advocates, and they all had like an app in their back pocket that they would test the wires out. You know, it's like, yeah, I got my fitness app, and I'm going to see how to rebuild it with Solid. Or, you know, I'm going to try out this React to Flux thing with it. And I was like, I don't have one of those. Oh, I must not be a very good engineer. But then when I was playing around with Alice, I was like, no, Alice is my Hello World app. Alice is the thing where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to see if I can recreate this using React Native, and if I can't, that library is a failure in my mind. And so, no, React Native is actually pretty good. No whistles, no hating on React Native. Those are nice people. But that's the point, is like, I love telling stories, and I still love telling stories with code and pretty pictures. And I would love it. I would love to see more people telling more stories. We're going to talk a lot about AI and code. Any AI can come up with a primary and secondary call to action button. But it's going to be a long time before we have robots telling really cool stories or kicking the tires and making a story that can both read to you and, you know, react to you in this capacity. There's still so many ways that we can make things that are interesting and tell stories better. I'm really hoping to see some of those, because even though it feels like we're entering into a winter, well, I feel like it, entering into a winter of uncertainty and layoffs and automation, it's also a really fun time to stretch your wings as a human being and do things that are a primal expression of what it means to be alive and to code for you. And I hope that you will leave CascadiaJS and tell some wicked cool stories in ways that no one else can, because they're uniquely you. And that's what I hope you'll take away from this. I'm going to tweet a link to the slides after I step off this table. So feel free to follow me at Nearest Neighbors on Twitter. I'm also Nearest Neighbors on Twitch if you want to watch me poke things with screwdrivers all day. It's what I'm doing with my time off amidst writing and other things. But anyway, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to see you, Cascadia, and I can't wait to see what you make.
All right. So if you want to know what courage under fire looks like, hold on, don't go anywhere, Rachel. Come here. Rachel Lee. If you want to know what it looks like to be cool under pressure and to like care so much about the story you're delivering, even when technical difficulties happen, like this is what this looks like. Another huge round of applause for Rachel Lee.
Thank you so much for having me. Nope, give me a hug.
Thank you.